Welcome into the Toronto Sports Rush right here on the Bent Rivers Network. EJ Hradek here. Remember, like and subscribe. Great content for you every single day in all different areas in the sports world. And today, Mondays with McGuire, we got the great Pierre McGuire, who is, I just chatting with him. He's officially a Swedish resident now. So congratulations. Spent a bunch of time in Sweden. What are you doing over there?
I was doing a lot of hockey work, EJ. Really good to see you. I know you're busy covering the Stanley Cup Final right now, but did a lot of work over in Sweden, had a great time. And then I was in Switzerland for the last week of the World Championship. So saw a lot of good players from a lot of different countries. It was great to see Sasha Barkov. I can tell you what, EJ,
Oh,
had a great visit with him. And the Florida Panthers will be back. Anton Lundell was there as well. Looking forward to seeing him back in an NHL sweater. The Florida Panthers are going to be for real next year. They're going to be tough.
I don't know if Toronto Maple Leaf fans want to hear that Sasha Barkov is going to be back, but unfortunately, for them at least, he is going to be back. And for 31 other teams around the NHL, good to see him back playing. And congratulations to the Finns on winning the World Championship. So let me start, Pierre, with there was a report from our friend Elliot Friedman about the Toronto coaching position. John Shaika looking to fill that coaching job to replace Craig Berube. And one of the names that Friedman threw out there was Joe Pavelski. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? Are you surprised at that? Is that something that would make sense for the Toronto Maple Leafs?
I'm not surprised because I think a lot of people are looking at what's gone on with Montreal Canadiens and the job that Marty St. Louis has done in Montreal. And people are looking at that saying, if Marty can do that there's a lot of similarities between Pavelski's career and Marty's career. When you look at it, Pavelski was 205th in his draft year in 2003, arguably the best draft in the history of the National Hockey League. He's a guy that had to overachieve to get to where he was. St. Louis was never drafted, went to the University of Vermont, just like Pavelski went to the University of Wisconsin. They both were tremendous college players. They found their way battling to get to the National Hockey League. I think Joe's had a lot of experience coaching young players, his sons in particular, or his son, I should say, not son, son in particular. And so I think people look at that and they probably say, if it could happen in Montreal, it might be able to happen in Toronto.
You know what's interesting about it though, Pierre, because I've heard that is, from others as well. And like I think that Marty went into Montreal, it was really a total rebuild at the time. I mean, I remember at that moment, Jeff Gorton, I don't even know if he wanted to fire Dominic Ducharme at that time, but things had just gotten so bad that he couldn't evaluate what he had there. So he had to make a move, and Marty was willing to come in just to finish the season, really with no guarantees. Somebody coming in Toronto has got some significant pieces there, and we're uncertain still kind of if this is going to be a retool, a reset, or what they want to call it. But it doesn't seem like it's going to be a complete rebuild. So I'm just curious if it makes sense for a inexperienced guy in that role. What do you think of that?
No, I like the thought. I see exactly where you're coming from. Let's also remember, too, that the Marlies are in the Calder Cup final in the American Hockey League. They just beat Wilkes-Barre, Pittsburgh's farm team, to move along. So they've got some players down there, one of them being Easton Cowan, obviously. Henry Thrun is down there. You look at Marshall Rafai is down there. They've got some guys that potentially could come up and play for the Toronto Maple Leafs next year. So all this extra time is actually good for them. I like your thought about, this is going to require somebody maybe with a little bit more experience. Maybe that's why you surround him with more veteran assistants. And Joe's the guy that can be the voice. I'm not saying Joe's going to get hired, but I can tell you that they have definitely had some discussion about it. There's no question about that.
It's interesting just because it was a name that wasn't really on the radar. And it seems like that the Leafs have interviewed, just about anybody you can find interview for a coaching job. I'll ask you this question as someone who's been around the game. You were a head coach in this league, so you know what it's all about. I mean, would you prefer, if you were John Shaika, an experienced guy in this situation in a market where there's always a lot of attention?
Yeah, I do think you need somebody that's very comfortable dealing with the media, somebody that understands the rebuilding process, somebody that understands the finishing part of the rebuilding process, and somebody that's going to be able to have an amazing dialogue with the management team. Here's the thing that has really made Montreal work. The scouts, the manager, the president of hockey operations, and the coaching staff are all singing from the same song.
Yeah.
If you get, and I've been around that group a ton, to their charity golf tournaments, to their games, to their practices. Those guys are all unified. It is an amazingly cohesive group in Montreal. If you bring in a guy that's an outlier who says, no, 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 I'm going to do it my way, and you got a management guy who say, no, 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 I'm going to do it my way, and you're going to do what I tell you, it's not going to work. You got to have everybody sing from the same songbook, whether they have experience or not.
Do you think in that case, do you think that someone who has familiarity with John Scheike would be a better choice here? Because, again, you're just saying you want to have people on the same page. And it's sometimes difficult to be assured of that when you don't know the person.
Yeah, no, it's fair. And here's the other thing, Matt Sundin, his name's not being mentioned enough in this whole thing. I was
Yeah.
in touch with Matt about 2 or 3 weeks ago when I was in Sweden. We were going to sit down to do an interview. I just didn't have the time, and he didn't have the time in his schedule. At some point, we will get a chance to get an interview, but I know he's really excited about it too. So his footprint is going to be pretty substantial in this whole Toronto Maple Leafs management group. He's just not going to be a figurehead. So, EJ, I think it's going to be interesting. I love the way you presented that to me earlier, though, because the truth of the matter is, I do think experience is going to matter with this job. I really do.
You go back to the Montreal situation, and everybody's lined up there, and I really think that a lot of it has to do with the owner, Jeff Molson. I mean, I just think that he's kind of figured things out there, and he's hired people and let them do their jobs. And I think that's always the case. You go back to those Red Wings teams with when Mike Ilitch kind of figured things out, and he brought in different people to run that organization and let them just do their jobs. And the same thing could be said with Jeff Vinik in Tampa. So I think Montreal's got that going for him. And I'm not sure where we're at with Toronto in terms of that alignment between the very top all the way through their organization.
Such a substantial point and very fair to make. I'll give you an example on Molson because I know him very well. When I was coaching at St. Lawrence University, Jeff tried out for our team. He didn't make our team, but he did try out, and he was a very, very competent hockey player. He was at the collegiate level. So I'll tell you this. He was on the record probably 7 or 8 years ago saying that president of hockey operations position is overrated. You don't need it. Now he's come kind of to a different position in his career as an owner, and he says, you know what? We do need it. So he's not afraid to make adjustments. That's what I really admire about Jeff. I think the course he was on was probably not correct, and he knows that because the team was floundering. He made a difference in terms of who he hired, how he positioned them, the titles they were given, and look at Montreal now. It's an amazing success story. I think people can learn from that, not just from who the coach is that they hired, but the way they decided to run their group as a management team. It's worked fantastically well.
All right, Pierre. So you were in Sweden for a while, and the Toronto Maple Leafs have the first pick in the draft. There's a lot of talk about Gavin McKenna. There's also some talk about Ivar Stenberg. I mean, what do you make of the Leafs having the top pick? Is it cut and dry that it's McKenna? Is it Stenberg? Is it maybe Chase Reed? Where are you in terms of as you think about what they should do for with that first overall pick of the draft?
I don't think they can go wrong with either guy. This reminds me a lot of, when you had Steven Stamkos and Drew Doughty. I'll never forget that. Steven went first overall to Tampa. They won Stanley Cups with Steven there. Drew Doughty goes second to LA. They won Stanley Cups there. So I don't think you can go wrong. I've seen McKenna play since he's been 15 years old. I've seen Stenberg play for the last 2 years. And I also was at a dinner with him before he went to the World Championships, and I watched him practice with Team Sweden. He's for real. Like, he's a really good player. And whether you take Stenberg or whether you take McKenna, you're not going to make a mistake. Both players are going to be really good. It comes down to what's your taste. Do you want a centerman or do you want a real winger? I'm going to say this. I was part of the management team that drafted Marcus Naslund in the 1991 draft. And that was a good draft. If you go back and look at it, it was a real good draft. The number one guy was Eric Lindros. Peter Forsberg went in that draft. Eventually he gets traded for Lindros. But if you look at all the names in that draft, it was really good. Stenberg reminds me a lot of Marcus. I see a lot of similarities between Marcus and Stenberg. And Marcus had one heck of a career. He had a fantastic career.
Is there anything or any scenario that you envision where they might trade that first overall pick?
I said this in Sweden on a television show. I said it wouldn't surprise me knowing that the Leafs have first overall. They're going to say we're going to trade that for a bushel full of players, but I don't think they will. I just,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, I think they keep it. It's obviously a very substantial pick. But if you go deeper in the draft, would not surprise me if San Jose traded their pick. It would not surprise me if the Rangers tried to trade 5 to get earlier in the draft. It wouldn't surprise me if Chicago traded 4. I don't think at 3 Vancouver's trading anything. I think Vancouver's going to pick at 3. They just don't know who's going to be available at 3. But it wouldn't surprise me if 2, 4, or 5 were traded. So San Jose, Chicago, and New York. Wouldn't surprise me at all if those picks were traded. But I don't think one's getting traded.
Well, from your lips to God's ear, because as you know, covering the draft over the year, it's nicer when there's a little excitement in the air and there's a
Yes,
couple of
sir.
moves. So hopefully that will be the case for those of us who will be there watching that unfold in Buffalo at the end of June. What did you make of Toronto bringing in Judd Brackett as an assistant GM? He's been a scouting director. He was in Minnesota and then in Vancouver before that. Seemingly a pretty well thought of guy. What do you make of that decision?
I've known Judd for a long time. Tremendous evaluator of talent, very good communicator, knows how to play nice in the sandbox with the people that he works for. No, it's really important in that position, but he's not afraid to have a strong opinion. So I really like that and admire that about him. I want to be totally transparent. He was part of a management group that signed my son out of Northeastern University. So again, I'm not just going to say something about somebody just because my kid signed there, but I do know his body of work really well. And have a lot of respect for him as a person. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him as a hockey decision maker. And my best friend in hockey, Ray Sherrill, who passed away a year ago, worked with Judd in Minnesota and thought so highly of him. So I'm a big fan, and I think it's a great hire for the Leafs. Great hire.
All right, so let's turn the conversation to a former Leaf, and he's getting a lot of conversation right now. It's Mitch Marner, and I'm out here in Vegas, and in Game 3, that second period was the Mitch Marner show. He had the hat trick. He had breaking the record, the fastest hat trick in Stanley Cup Final history. You had to go back to 1957 when a fellow by the name of Maurice Rocket Richard was able to score 3 goals in quick order in a period in the Cup Final. Marner was able to do it in a shorter span of time, and then he was the first player to have 4 points in a single Stanley Cup Final period going back to 1919. So, I mean, those are some significant accomplishments for Marner. In the end, the game turned out to be a nutty game where the Vegas Golden Knights blew a 4-0 lead in the third period. Carolina tied it, went to double overtime in the end. Shea Theodore gets credit for a goofy goal that gave Vegas the win. But, there's just been a lot of talk about throughout the playoffs, really, Pierre, as you know, the Leafs and Marner's playing so well. Now, I think it's just a situation where this guy is playing on a better team. There's just more support. He's playing on a second line right now with Carlson and with Howden. That trio has been really good. They get better push out of the back end in Vegas with the puck movers like Theodore back there. So for me, I just think he's playing in a better situation and flourishing. Not that it wasn't a good situation in Toronto, but I don't think they had the depth in really all areas that Vegas has.
100%. You're so right. And let's compound that with the elite puck mover that Shea Theodore is. Let's compound that with Noah Hannafin and Rasmus Anderson, who came over late this year from Calgary, talking about Rasmus Anderson. Let's talk about, you talk about William Karlsson. William Karlsson didn't play for good portions of this season, so people were wondering about Mitchell Marner, can he or can he? Well, you get William Karlsson in the lineup, you got a creative playmaker that can also play really well defensively. I think Mitchell's played fantastically well. I don't know why there'd be all this vitriol towards him now. The truth of the matter is celebrate greatness. And he had a great, great performance in Game 3. And he's been very good all playoff long, better than very good. And just when it comes to natural hat tricks in the Stanley Cup Final, I coached against a guy that had one, Dirk Graham, in the 1992 Stanley Cup Final.
I remember that.
Dirk got a natural hat trick. And the third goal was because of a bad line change that this person, me, orchestrated. So I'm going to take credit for Dirk Graham's natural hat trick. Every time I see Dirk on the road, I always tell him, dude, you got a natural hat trick. I know your team didn't win the cup, but you did get a natural hat trick against a pretty good team in the Pittsburgh Penguins.
I remember that game. That was another crazy Stanley Cup Final game because it was in the old Chicago Stadium, if I'm remembering correctly. And I think Dominik Hasek came off the bench for Chicago, and it ended up Pittsburgh. You guys ended up winning, but it was a crazy game.
If Hasek hadn't come in that game, Eddie had a really tough series, Eddie Belfour. Hasek kept that close because we may have played our best game of the series in game 4, but Hasek kept it close, and it went right to the end when Tommy Barrasso had to make a couple big saves, one of them against Chris Chelios with time running out on the clock. But you are spot on. It was an old Chicago stadium. And I can tell you this, EJ, everybody talks about how loud it is in Carolina, and they talk about how loud it is in Vegas. I'm going to tell you right now, I've done Stanley Cup playoff finals in both of those buildings. And I coached in one in old Chicago Stadium. With all due respect to those buildings in Vegas and Carolina, it's not even close.
Yeah, Chicago Stadium was
not even close. And EJ, just to back me up, Scotty Bowman used to say to me before we coached a lot of games together, he goes, make sure you yell at the players when you're in Chicago Stadium because they will not hear you. And I thought he was full of poop before the first time we did it. And all of a sudden I was like, oh man, he's serious. So then I started yelling and the players started laughing. It was pretty good. But
what crazy. That was, hey, listen, those were the good days for sure. And that was a crazy series because I say it now, like Hasek came off the bench and people are like, why would he even be on the bench? But at that time he had come over from the then Czechoslovakia, and I guess it was still right around the time it had changed over to the Czech Republic, Czechia. Yeah, and so a lot of people didn't really know who Dominik Hasek was, and really didn't have the confidence of the coaches and the people who are in the NHL. They knew there was something there, but he was behind Belfour, and in the end, I believe it was Mike Keenan threw him in there, and he almost stole that game.
You're absolutely right, and it was Mike Keenan, and not long after, though, he got traded to Buffalo for Stefan Beauregard, one of the greatest heists of all time for Buffalo Sabres. No disrespect meant to Stefan Beauregard. But here's one for you, too, for the fans that, like to have these loud buildings. When you stood in Chicago in the stadium, the floor shook when they did the anthem. You could feel the floorboard shaking. And it's the most unique experience I've ever had in all the years. And 16 Stanley Cup Finals, 2 of them I was a part of as a coach. So that's 18 really. That's the only time I've ever experienced the floor shaking was old Chicago Stadium.
I'll tell you, these 2 buildings here, maybe it's because the building in Vegas, which I love. I think I'm sure you've worked there. It's one of the great buildings in the league. It's just, and they've thought of really everything, and it's a terrific place, but it's very big. The Carolina building is an older building. I find it to be much louder in Carolina just because of the way that structure is set up.
I agree with you. I've done the final in Vegas, actually twice. I did the final when they lost, and they did the final again when they won. So you kind of get used to them all. And Carolina in 2006 when they went to the final and won, and also the final in Carolina in 2002 when they lost to Detroit. So I've been to numerous finals in both those buildings. You're spot on. You nailed it. Carolina is a little bit older, but the noise is heavier duty in Carolina.
Let me ask you this. If Vegas wins this series, and it's only 2-1, and I think it's just been a great back and forth so far. I mean, people ask me what I think is going to happen next. I have no idea. You could tell me literally anything right now, and I would believe it based on what we've seen in these first 3 games. But if Vegas were to win it, is Mitch Marner your Conn Smythe winner?
At this point, if you were to ask me right now, I think he's the best player for the Vegas Golden Knights. I really do. I think Carter Hart might get some mention if they were to continue on this pace. But I would say if you were to ask me who's been the most clutch offensive player for them, without a doubt, it's Mitchell Marner.
Yeah, I've been really, and Pierre, again, I lean on your experience. You were right at the best seat in the house for so many years there, covering the games for NBC. And, watching Marner up close, the guy's been in the league a long time, but, when you're there in the building and you're watching the little things, and again, he is supported really well now. He does so many things well during the game. It's it's really even more impressive when you get to really see him in up close and in a big spot.
One of the things that was so underappreciated about him, especially during the Babcock era in Detroit, or sorry, in Toronto, was how much Mike relied on him to kill penalties and playing
Yeah.
shutdown roles at the end of a game. It never really got brought up, but Mitchell was really good at that. And you can see how much John Tortorella trusts him, EJ, because he puts him
Yeah.
on the ice in key penalty killing moments. And at the end of a game, if you go back to game one, the big shot block against Nikishin,
Yeah.
that's Mitchell Martin. Now, is it the most orthodox shot block you've ever seen? No, it's not. But nonetheless, he found a way to get in the lane and block the shot. And
Yeah.
so, you got to give the guy credit where credit's due. But I do think the most underappreciated part of his game, EJ, is how solid he is defensively. He's extremely good defensively.
You know what else too about that shot block? And you're right, it was unorthodox, and he was kind of almost trying to get out of the way, but he did get the block.
He did.
Afterwards, that was in the final seconds of the game. The game ends, and if you watch the tape, the Vegas Golden Knight players all race to Marner. Usually they rally around the goalie. They all race to Marner and they kind of congratulate him. And I think it goes to show you that they really, he has fit in really nicely there, and they really appreciate all the things he does, at least the teammates there.
Absolutely. I think there's a whole lot of love from Jack Eichel. I think there's a whole lot of love from William Karlsson. You look at, Braden McNabb and the courage he has and how much he
Wow.
respects Mitchell Marner. Watch some of the passing sequences between McNabb and Marner. One guy's mostly a defensive defenseman, one guy's an offensive forward. It's pretty special to see the chemistry those two guys have. So there's a lot of good stuff going on there in Vegas with Mitchell Marner. We're not trying to beat up Leaf fans. We're just stating
no.
the truth of the matter is this guy's really good. It didn't work out in Toronto. It sure looks like it's working out pretty well in Vegas.
That's the thing too. It's like, a lot of things can be true at the same time. The fact that it didn't go as well in Toronto for a number of reasons, and in big moments, because obviously in the regular season, this guy was a star player, and 100-point campaigns and really good seasons for the team during his time there. In the playoffs, it just didn't happen to the extent it's happening now. And I say the same thing. He just wasn't supported as well as he is supported in Vegas right now. And I would say the same thing for Matthews and Nylander. They don't have Shea Theodore and Noah Hannafin, as you point out, moving that puck up the ice. And they're not deep through, the entire roster with guys maybe slotted in the right place. Vegas won a cup in 23, and now they're on the verge of maybe winning another one now. That's not an accident. So I think Marner has slid in nicely there. It can, like I say, it's not any reflection on necessarily what went on in Toronto or the fans or anything. He's a really good player. He's in, I think, a little bit of a better situation now, and maybe with experience, that's part of it. But he's playing really well right now.
He is. This reminds me a lot of Larry Murphy when he went from Pittsburgh to Toronto. It didn't work out very well in Toronto, and he goes to Detroit, and it worked out really well. So
he was playing with Lidstrom, right?
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So one guy goes from playing here and he plays with different players in Vegas and it works out. The other guy goes from playing in Toronto and he goes and plays with Nicky Lidstrom and it works out unbelievably well. And just a little shout out. I'm going to be seeing Larry and Kenny Danico. I know a good friend of yours over in Ireland. I'm working the 3 Ice World Championship events in Belfast at the start of July. So
nice.
I'll be seeing all those old guys. Danico was my defense partner at Devils training camp back in 1984, 85. And I coached Larry for 2 years, and it was an amazing honor and privilege to coach Larry. Now I get to go hang out with him in Northern Ireland at the beginning of July.
Nice. All right, one more thing for Pierre. I'll ask you, who's going to win the Cup?
I thought Carolina was going to win it when the series started, and I'm going to stay with Carolina, but that's not to sell Vegas short. I still think Carolina's got an A game to play. I don't believe they've played an A game in this series, and I think their A game is probably going to come in Game 4 on Tuesday night.
All right, so we will see. Looking forward to that one as well. Pierre, thanks again for the time. Always love catching up with you. I'm glad that you got back from Sweden, and I'm glad you had a good time over there.
Yeah, it's fika time now. I got to go have a coffee and a nice Danish. There you go. Have a good one, EJ. Enjoy Vegas. Enjoy the rest of the final. And keep up the great work. Thank you, EJ.
All right, thank you. Pierre McGuire, Mondays with McGuire right here on the Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.